The chef who nearly died from his own cooking. What if I told you that one perfect anniversary dinner could destroy everything you've worked for your entire life? What if the meal you prepared with love and expertise became the thing that nearly killed you, bankrupted your family, and exposed an industry-wide conspiracy? This isn't fiction. This is the terrifying true story of Matthew Sinclair, and it could happen to anyone who thinks they're too skilled, too experienced, or too careful to fall victim to invisible dangers lurking in plain sight. Picture this. You're at the top of your game, executive chef at one of Seattle's most prestigious restaurants. Your pregnant wife is glowing with anticipation of your first child. You've just bought your dream home, and everything is falling perfectly into place. Then you decide to cook the perfect anniversary meal using the finest ingredients money can buy. Within hours, your body becomes a battleground, and within months, everything you've built crumbles around you. But here's the twist that'll blow your mind. The very expertise that made Matthew successful, his willingness to push boundaries and seek the absolute best ingredients, became the weapon that nearly destroyed him. And the most shocking part? The people he trusted most, the industry he devoted his life to, knew this could happen and chose profits over his life. This story isn't just about one chef's nightmare. It's about how our pursuit of perfection, our trust in systems, and our blind spots can lead us into unimaginable horror. It's about parasites that literally eat you alive from the inside, corporate cover-ups that would make your blood boil, and the incredible strength of the human spirit when everything seems lost. Settle in, because what you're about to hear will change how you think about food, trust, and the price we pay for our ambitions. This is a story that spans hospital rooms and boardrooms, courtrooms and kitchens, love and betrayal, near death and rebirth. And every single word of it is true. Matthew Sinclair moved through his restaurant kitchen like a conductor leading an orchestra. At 30 years old, with sandy brown hair that constantly fell across his forehead as he worked, he embodied everything you'd want in a chef. Precision, passion, and that indefinable quality that separates good cooks from great ones. His hands told the story of his dedication, scarred from years of burns and cuts, strong and sure as they transformed raw ingredients into culinary art. The restaurant where he worked had become legendary. What started as just another upscale seafood place had transformed under his leadership into something extraordinary. Reservations were booked 3 months in advance, food critics made pilgrimages to taste his creations, and other chefs studied his techniques like scholars examining ancient texts. But success in the culinary world comes with a price. The hours were brutal, the pressure relentless, and the margin for error non-existent. Matthew thrived on it all. He was known for taking risks that other chefs wouldn't dare attempt, especially when it came to raw seafood preparations. His philosophy was simple. If you're going to serve something raw, it better be so perfect, so pristine, that it elevates the entire dining experience. That philosophy would soon become his nightmare. His wife Emma was everything Matthew wasn't. Where he was impulsive and artistic, she was practical and grounded. As a kindergarten teacher and former nurse, she brought medical knowledge and common sense to their relationship. Her honey-blonde hair and warm smile could light up any room, but it was her sharp mind and steady presence that had captured Matthew's heart 8 years earlier. Now 7 months pregnant with their first child, Emma glowed with that special radiance that expecting mothers seem to possess. They'd planned everything so carefully. The down payment on their dream home in a quiet Seattle neighborhood, the college fund they'd started before their daughter was even born, the careful balance between Matthew's demanding career and their growing family. Their best friend Tyler had been with Matthew since culinary school. More than just his sous chef, Tyler was his brother in arms, the person who understood the pressure, the passion, and the pursuit of perfection that drove them both. They'd climbed the ranks together, celebrated victories together, and pushed each other to be better every single day. Tyler was also the one person Matthew trusted completely when it came to sourcing ingredients. In the high-end culinary world, relationships with suppliers aren't just business transactions, they're sacred bonds. The difference between good fish and extraordinary fish could make or break a restaurant's reputation. Tyler had connections everywhere, from the legitimate suppliers they used daily to the more creative sources that could provide something truly special for the right price. And that's where our story really begins. Because sometimes, the pursuit of perfection leads you down paths you never should have taken. Matthew had been planning their 5th wedding anniversary dinner for weeks. This wasn't going to be some casual celebration with takeout and a bottle of wine. This was going to be a meal that Emma would remember for the rest of her life, a culinary love letter that showcased not just his skills as a chef, but his devotion as a husband. The centerpiece would be a special sushi preparation, 3 pieces of nigiri that each told a story. Salmon from Pike Place Market, where he'd nervously proposed 5 years earlier while tourists bustled around them and vendors hawked their wares. Yellowtail to represent their honeymoon in Hawaii, where they'd spent lazy afternoons eating fresh poke while waves crashed against black volcanic shores. And for the finale, something extraordinary: bluefin tuna so fresh it had arrived in Seattle that very morning. Here's where Tyler's connections came into play. Getting truly exceptional bluefin tuna isn't just about money, it's about relationships. The fish that makes it through normal distribution channels is good, but the really special stuff, the pieces that make food critics weep with joy, those come from knowing the right people. Tyler knew a guy at the docks. This wasn't unusual in their world. Half the best restaurants in any coastal city had similar arrangements. Fishermen and dock workers who could set aside the absolute best of their catch before it went through official channels. It was expensive, sure, but for special occasions, for the moments that mattered, it was worth every penny. The bluefin that arrived that morning was magnificent. Deep red flesh marbled with fat lines that promised incredible flavor, the kind of fish that comes along maybe once in a season. Matthew examined it with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years learning to read the subtle signs of quality. The color was perfect, the smell clean and oceanic, the texture firm but yielding. This was exactly what he'd hoped for. But here's something Matthew didn't know, something that would haunt him for months to come. That beautiful piece of fish, that perfect anniversary centerpiece, had never been through the safety protocols that protect consumers from the invisible dangers lurking in raw seafood. It had gone straight from boat to dock to Tyler's contact to their kitchen, bypassing every single safeguard that the food industry had developed over decades of hard-learned lessons. In his pursuit of the perfect meal, Matthew had unknowingly invited something horrifying into his body. Something that would soon begin eating him alive from the inside. The dinner itself was magical. Emma had dressed up despite her pregnancy, wearing the blue dress she'd worn on their second date because she knew it was Matthew's favorite. He'd transformed their modest dining room with candles and their wedding china, creating an atmosphere of intimacy and celebration. As he presented each piece of the sushi progression, Matthew told the story behind it. The salmon that represented nervous young love and the leap of faith that marriage requires. The yellowtail that symbolized their perfect honeymoon, those golden days when the future stretched out before them like an endless summer. And finally, the bluefin tuna, representing this moment, this perfect evening, this celebration of 5 years together and the family they were about to become. Emma was initially hesitant about eating raw fish while pregnant. Her nursing background made her cautious about food safety during pregnancy, but Matthew had prepared a cooked version for her as well. He explained his sourcing, his preparation methods, his absolute confidence in the quality and safety of what he was serving. His enthusiasm was infectious, as it always was, and Emma found herself caught up in his excitement. The tuna was extraordinary. Buttery and rich with a clean finish that spoke of ocean depths and perfect handling. Matthew savored every bite, describing the flavors to Emma with the passion that had made him fall in love with cooking in the first place. This was why he did what he did, for moments like this when food became more than sustenance, when it became art, memory, and love all rolled into one perfect bite. That night, they talked about their daughter, about names and nursery colors and all the dreams they had for her future. They talked about Matthew's career, about the possibility of opening their own place someday, about the legacy they wanted to build together. Emma fell asleep with her head on his shoulder while he rubbed her belly and felt their daughter kick against his palm. It was, in every way, a perfect evening. The last perfect evening they would have for a very long time. The first symptoms appeared the next morning as Matthew was preparing for what promised to be one of the most important weeks of his career. A major food critic from an influential newspaper was scheduled to visit the restaurant, the kind of review that could make or break careers and determine whether reservations stayed booked for months or tables sat empty. It started with just a small patch of redness on his forearm, barely noticeable except for the mild itching that made him scratch absently while he worked on menu preparations. Emma noticed it first, her nursing instincts kicking in even though she was focused on getting ready for her teaching job. "You should have someone look at that," she said, pointing to the irritated skin as Matthew pulled on his chef's coat. "Could be an allergic reaction to something." Matthew shrugged it off. In his world, minor injuries and irritations were part of the job. Burns, cuts, rashes from cleaning chemicals or new ingredients, these were just occupational hazards that every chef learned to ignore. He had bigger things to worry about than a little skin irritation. The restaurant critic's visit was scheduled for that Thursday. Matthew had spent weeks preparing a special tasting menu that would showcase not just his technical skills, but his creativity and understanding of flavor. Every dish had to be perfect, every plate precisely composed, every sauce exactly the right consistency and temperature. By Tuesday, the rash had spread to his chest and back, angry red patches that burned when he sweated in the hot kitchen. Worse, he'd started experiencing stomach cramps, brief but intense spasms that would double him over when they hit. He found himself having to step away from the line multiple times during service, splashing cold water on his face and taking deep breaths until the pain subsided. Tyler noticed something was wrong. "You look like hell," he whispered during a brief lull in orders. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Matthew snapped, immediately regretting his harsh tone. "Sorry, just stressed about the review." "I'm fine." But he wasn't fine, and by Thursday night, when the critic finally arrived, Matthew could barely concentrate on his cooking. The itching had become constant, a maddening sensation that made him want to claw at his skin. The stomach problems had intensified, and he was popping antacids like candy between orders. Still, he pushed through. This was what separated professional chefs from home cooks, the ability to perform at the highest level regardless of personal discomfort. The critic seemed pleased with the meal, lingering over dessert and asking to speak with Matthew before leaving. In any other circumstances, this would have been cause for celebration. Instead, Matthew could barely focus on the conversation. All he wanted was to go home, take a hot shower, and try to get some sleep. The critic's compliments felt distant and unreal, filtered through the haze of discomfort that had become his constant companion. 3 days later, with the rash spreading to his neck and face and the stomach problems becoming unbearable, Emma finally convinced him to seek medical attention. The urgent care doctor barely glanced at Matthew's inflamed skin before diagnosing an allergic reaction and prescribing antihistamines. "Probably something you ate or came into contact with at work," the doctor said dismissively. "Restaurant workers get this kind of thing all the time. Take these for a week, and if it doesn't clear up, see your regular physician." Emma frowned at the casual diagnosis. Her medical training told her this wasn't a typical allergic reaction, but the doctor's patronizing smile made it clear he wasn't interested in her concerns. This was the first of many medical encounters that would leave them feeling frustrated and unheard. The antihistamines made Matthew drowsy, which was dangerous in a kitchen environment filled with sharp knives and split-second timing decisions. After 2 days of nearly cutting himself and struggling to focus on complex preparations, he stopped taking them and relied on over-the-counter creams for temporary relief. But the symptoms kept getting worse. The rash continued spreading, the stomach problems intensified, and Matthew began experiencing something that terrified him more than any physical pain. He started feeling things moving under his skin. At first, he thought it was his imagination, a side effect of stress and sleep deprivation. But as the sensation became more frequent and more distinct, he couldn't dismiss it anymore. There was something alive inside him, something that moved and shifted beneath the inflamed tissue like a snake beneath a blanket. He didn't tell Emma about this particular symptom. How do you explain to your pregnant wife that you think something is living inside your body? How do you voice a fear so primal and horrifying that it sounds like the plot of a horror movie? Instead, he threw himself deeper into work, using the familiar rhythms of kitchen service as a distraction from his mounting terror. But even that refuge was being taken from him. His hands shook when he tried to do delicate plating. His sense of taste seemed dulled, making it harder to adjust seasonings. His normally sharp focus wandered at crucial moments. The other kitchen staff began to notice. Whispered conversations stopped when he approached. Orders came back from tables, something that rarely happened with Matthew's food. The seamless machine he'd spent years building began to show cracks, and everyone could see them. Emma's baby shower was scheduled for the following weekend, and despite his deteriorating condition, Matthew promised to attend. He knew how important it was to her, how much she wanted him there to celebrate their daughter's imminent arrival. He managed to button his dress shirt over the raw, inflamed skin on his neck, using Emma's makeup to cover the worst of the visible rash. "You clean up well, chef," Emma said, adjusting his tie. Her 7-month belly was beautifully round, and Matthew marveled at how radiant she looked despite his own physical and emotional deterioration. "I should wear something other than kitchen whites more often," he replied, trying to make a joke even though he could see the worry in her eyes. The country club was elegant, decorated in soft pastels with elaborate floral arrangements. Emma's mother had invited 60 guests, most of whom Matthew had never met. He made polite conversation with Emma's father's business associates and accepted congratulations from distant relatives, all while fighting waves of nausea and the constant, maddening itch. Then, during lunch, disaster struck. The first bite of his meal triggered such intense stomach pain that Matthew doubled over at the table, gasping for breath as sweat broke out across his forehead. Emma grabbed his arm, her voice tight with fear as she asked what was wrong. The room began to spin. Faces blurred as Matthew gripped the tablecloth, his vision tunneling as the pain intensified. The last thing he remembered was Emma's mother's shocked expression as he collapsed, shattering a crystal water glass on the polished floor. He woke up in the emergency department with Emma's tearful face hovering above him and a doctor shining a penlight in his eyes. The attending physician, Dr. Harrington, examined the angry red welts covering Matthew's torso with professional detachment. "Looks like severe contact dermatitis, possibly combined with food allergies," Dr. Harrington announced after reviewing Matthew's blood work. "Your inflammatory markers are elevated, but nothing immediately dangerous. I'll refer you to a dermatologist and prescribe a stronger antihistamine." Emma's nursing background made her push back against the casual diagnosis. "This isn't just a rash," she insisted. "He's having severe abdominal pain, night sweats, and the affected areas feel hot to the touch. Something's wrong." Dr. Harrington's expression tightened with barely concealed annoyance. "Mrs. Sinclair, I understand your concern, but we see this kind of thing frequently. Food service workers are exposed to numerous potential irritants. We've run the appropriate tests, and nothing serious has shown up." As Dr. Harrington was leaving, a younger physician who had been observing from the doorway stepped forward. Dr. Alicia Myers introduced herself and asked if she could examine Matthew more thoroughly. Unlike her senior colleague, Dr. Myers asked specific, detailed questions about his symptoms. Had he traveled recently? Did he handle raw fish regularly? Had there been any changes in the pattern of the rash or the sensations he was experiencing? When Matthew hesitantly mentioned that sometimes it felt like something was moving under his skin, Dr. Myers nodded thoughtfully instead of dismissing his concern. "I'd like to run some additional tests," she said. "Your symptoms are consistent with several types of parasitic infections that we don't see very often, but given your profession, it's worth investigating." The word parasitic hit Matthew like a physical blow. He'd heard of parasites in fish, of course. Every chef knew about the dangers of improperly handled seafood. But those were theoretical concerns, the kind of thing that happened to other people who didn't know what they were doing. He was a professional. He knew how to handle food safely. Except, apparently, he didn't. Dr. Myers ordered blood draws, skin scrapings, and an ultrasound of the most affected areas. She warned that results wouldn't be immediate but promised to expedite the testing. In the meantime, she prescribed stronger pain and anti-inflammatory medications and asked Matthew to document any changes in his condition with photos and notes. The hours in the emergency department felt endless. Emma sat beside his bed, one hand protecting her belly and the other touching his arm as if she needed to reassure herself that he was still there. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? Their carefully planned life was falling apart, and neither of them knew why or how to fix it. That night, as Matthew lay awake scratching at his inflamed skin despite the medication, his phone buzzed with a text message that made his blood run cold. It was from Marcus, the restaurant owner. "Need to talk tomorrow before service. My office, 2 p.m. Matthew stared at the screen, knowing that casual check-ins didn't happen via text at specific times. This was bad news, and given everything else falling apart in his life, he suspected he knew what it was about. The next afternoon, sitting across from Marcus in the restaurant's cramped office, Matthew's worst fears were confirmed. Marcus was typically upbeat and encouraging, but today his demeanor was formal and distant. "Matt, your food quality has been slipping," Marcus began without preamble. "The scallops were under-seasoned last night. Table 9 sent them back. 2 days ago, the special was plated inconsistently. This isn't like you." Matthew tried to explain about his health issues, but Marcus cut him off. "I've had several staff members mention that you've been unwell during service. Shaking hands, excessive sweating, stepping away from the line. Customers are starting to notice." The words hit Matthew like a punch to the gut. His reputation, his career, Everything he'd built over the past decade was being stripped away in a single conversation. "I need a few days to get proper medical treatment," Matthew said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You need medical leave," Marcus interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Paid, obviously. I can't have you cooking until you're completely better. Tyler will take over as interim executive chef." Just like that, Matthew's world collapsed a little bit more. The kitchen was his domain, his kingdom, the place where he felt most like himself. Now even that was being taken away. "How long?" Matthew asked, dreading the answer. Marcus's expression softened slightly. "That depends on you and your doctors, Matt. You're the best chef I've ever worked with, but you need to take care of yourself first. We'll be here when you're ready to come back." That evening, while applying yet another ineffective lotion to his torso, Matthew discovered something that made him gasp in horror. Under the harsh bathroom lighting, he could see a small but distinct movement in one of the inflamed welts on his abdomen. When he pressed gently on the area, he could feel something shifting beneath the irritated tissue. With shaking hands, he called for Emma. Whatever was inside him wasn't his imagination anymore. It was real, and it was alive. The medical leave felt like exile. Matthew had never spent so much time at home without the familiar chaos of the kitchen to anchor his days. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the constant pinging of his phone with messages from Tyler about what was happening at the restaurant. Each message was a reminder that the world was moving on without him. His carefully planned menus were being executed by someone else's hands. His reputation was in Tyler's care now, and while he trusted his friend, the loss of control was eating at him almost as much as whatever was literally eating at his body. Emma tried to maintain normalcy, but Matthew could see the strain on her face every time she looked at him. She was dealing with her own pregnancy complications now, too. Her blood pressure had spiked at her last appointment, raising concerns about preeclampsia that could endanger both her and the baby. "Dr. Levine wants to see me twice a week now," Emma mentioned one afternoon after returning from a prenatal appointment. "She thinks the baby might come early." "How early?" Matthew asked, feeling another piece of his world shift beneath his feet. "Maybe 2 or 3 weeks," Emma replied, unconsciously touching her belly. "She's worried about my blood pressure." Matthew was devastated by the news. Here was Emma, dealing with pregnancy complications, and she hadn't told him because she didn't want to add to his stress. The realization that his condition was affecting her health, potentially putting their unborn daughter at risk, was almost more than he could bear. The financial implications of their situation were becoming clear, too. Matthew's medical leave covered his base salary but not the performance bonuses that helped them make their mortgage payments. With Emma about to take 3 months of unpaid maternity leave and a baby on the way, their carefully balanced budget was crumbling. Their financial advisor painted a grim picture during an emergency video call. They could tap into their small emergency fund, take out a home equity line of credit, or borrow money from Emma's parents. The last option made Matthew's stomach turn. Robert and Diane Collins had never thought their daughter should marry a chef, viewing the profession as unstable and beneath her. To ask for money now, when their doubts seemed to be proven correct, felt like admitting defeat. Over the following weeks, Matthew saw a parade of specialists. A dermatologist diagnosed severe eczema. A gastroenterologist suggested work-related irritable bowel syndrome. An allergist recommended eliminating dairy and gluten from his diet. None of their treatments helped, and none could explain Matthew's most disturbing symptom, the feeling of things moving under his skin. Dr. Myers was the only physician who took his constellation of symptoms seriously. She followed up regularly and coordinated with his specialists, but even she was running into roadblocks. "The routine tests aren't giving us enough information," she explained during a follow-up appointment. "Your symptoms are consistent with several parasitic conditions, but the standard screenings aren't detecting anything. There's a problem, though. I can't order the more specific tests I'd like to run." "What kind of problem?" Matthew asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Dr. Myers looked uncomfortable. "Your insurance company is denying coverage. They're claiming this is a pre-existing occupational condition that should be covered by workers' compensation rather than medical insurance." "That's insane," Emma said. "How can they determine the cause without a diagnosis?" Dr. Myers sighed. Unfortunately, since Matthew mentioned his work with raw fish, The insurance company is arguing that any parasitic infection would be due to occupational exposure and should be covered by workers' comp, not medical insurance. And workers' comp? Matthew asked, already knowing the answer. They won't authorize a claim without a diagnosis linking the condition to your job. It was a perfect catch. 22. They couldn't get the tests needed for a diagnosis because insurance wouldn't cover them, and they couldn't prove it was work-related without the diagnosis. The specialized testing would cost hundreds of dollars they didn't have, especially with the baby coming soon. That evening, desperate for some distraction, Matthew found himself scrolling through chef forums online. A discussion thread caught his attention. Anyone else getting weird rashes from handling fish? The symptoms described in the thread were eerily similar to his own: persistent itching, raised red welts, gastrointestinal issues, and most disturbingly, the sensation of something moving under the skin. Matthew created an anonymous account and described his symptoms. Within hours, he received 3 private messages from other chefs with similar experiences, all requesting complete confidentiality. "I almost lost my job when word got out," wrote one chef from a high-end seafood restaurant in Chicago. "Management was terrified customers would think our fish was contaminated if it became public knowledge." "Did you get diagnosed?" Matthew typed frantically. Eventually, doctor found a parasite called Anisakis simplex. Treatment was rough, but it worked. Had to pay cash for everything though. Couldn't risk having it show up on insurance where the restaurant might see it. Anisakis simplex. Matthew spent the rest of the night researching the parasite. The images made his stomach turn. Microscopic, thread-like worms that could embed in the digestive tract and sometimes migrate to other tissues. It was exactly what he'd been feeling under his skin. The next morning, Emma went pale when he showed her his research. "This matches your symptoms perfectly," she said, reading through the medical literature. "Why didn't any of the doctors recognize this?" "It's not that mysterious," Matthew said. "According to the forums, it's much more common in Japan and coastal European countries where raw fish consumption is higher. Most American doctors don't see it often enough to recognize it." Matthew called Dr. Myers with this information. She agreed to order an Anisakis antibody test, but warned that they would have to pay for it out of pocket unless their insurance would reconsider coverage. Meanwhile, Tyler had been keeping tabs on Matthew, visiting him after work and bringing staff meals. During one visit, Matthew carefully broached the subject of fish handling safety. "Have you ever heard of chefs getting infected with Anisakis from handling raw fish?" he asked casually. Tyler paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "Actually, yes. A guy who worked at one of the seafood restaurants in Portland got sick from it a few years ago." "Why?" Matthew showed him the research and explained his suspicions. Tyler's normally cheerful expression turned grave. "Christ, Matt. Do you think you have that? Have you told Marcus?" "Not yet. I don't have a definitive diagnosis yet. You know how the restaurant industry is about food safety scares. I need to be certain before I say something that could damage the restaurant's reputation." Tyler put down his fork, looking troubled. "But if you got it from fish we use, shouldn't I have symptoms too? We handle the same suppliers, the same seafood." It was a good question, one that had been nagging at Matthew. Perhaps his exposure had been different somehow. They'd gotten that special bluefin for his anniversary dinner, the one from Tyler's Dock Connection. "That high-end piece we got for my anniversary dinner," Matthew said carefully. "The one from your Dock Connection. Was it properly frozen to kill parasites?" Tyler's expression changed, a shadow passing across his face. "It was beautiful, Matt. Fresh as you could get. But was it frozen? Treated to kill parasites?" Tyler avoided his gaze. "It was incredible quality. Straight off the boat." The conversation left Matthew uneasy, a feeling that intensified when he received an email from their insurance company the next day. His request for specialized testing had been denied again, with a clause he'd never seen before. In cases where the insured possesses professional knowledge of food safety protocols, self-inflicted conditions resulting from voluntary consumption of high-risk foods may not be excluded from policy coverage. In other words, because Matthew was a chef who should have known better than to eat raw fish without proper parasite killing treatment, he was responsible for his own condition. Emma was furious. "This is ridiculous. How can they deny coverage for a legitimate medical condition?" "Because they can," Matthew said bitterly. They're right, in a way. I should have known better. This is entirely my fault. Stop it, Emma commanded. You didn't hurt yourself intentionally. Even if you made an error in judgment, that doesn't mean you should go without treatment. She grabbed her laptop. I'm going to research every patient advocacy group and medical assistance program I can find. We're going to fight this. While Emma battled the insurance company, Matthew dove deeper into online research. He joined private chef groups where people discussed the rarely talked about occupational hazards of their profession. The stories were eye-opening: line cooks working through food poisoning because they couldn't afford time off, pastry chefs developing serious respiratory problems from flour dust, and yes, parasitic infections from raw seafood. Most disturbing were the stories of cover-ups. Chefs pressured into silence by restaurant owners afraid of bad publicity. Workers fired for filing workers' compensation claims. Even suggestions that some high-end restaurant groups maintained slush funds to pay off employees with occupational illnesses in exchange for signing non-disclosure agreements. Matthew began to wonder if similar incidents had happened at his restaurant before him. The restaurant group had been operating for 15 years, with several different executive chefs overseeing the flagship location. Had others experienced what he was going through? Had they disappeared quietly, their illnesses attributed to personal health problems rather than occupational exposure? When he tried to access his complete personnel file for a medical assistance application, the HR director was strangely evasive, claiming that some records were archived and not immediately available. At his next appointment with Dr. Myers, Matthew brought printouts of his Anasaki's research and testimonials from other affected chefs. After reviewing the materials, she nodded grimly. "This is exactly what I suspected," she said. "The larval migration patterns match your symptom progression perfectly." She looked at him seriously. "I've been doing some research of my own. I found a parasitology lab in Portland that can run the comprehensive testing we need. They're willing to work with us on payment." "How much?" Matthew asked, bracing himself. $3,000 for the complete panel," she said. "I know it's steep, but if we can confirm Anasaki's, we can start treatment immediately." $3,000 they didn't have, with a baby due in weeks. Matthew felt the walls closing in around him. That night, as he lay in bed trying to find a comfortable position while Emma slept beside him, one hand protectively covering her belly, Matthew made a decision that would change everything. In the dim streetlight filtering through their bedroom window, he carefully lifted his t-shirt and shined his phone's flashlight on his abdomen. What he saw under the bright LED light made his blood run cold. He could clearly see a faint, sinuous movement beneath his skin, a delicate rippling that traced from one inflamed area to another. With shaking hands, he recorded a video, holding his breath to keep the phone steady. When he played it back, the evidence was undeniable. Something was moving through his body like an explorer in uncharted territory. He sent the video to Dr. Myers with a simple message: "I need that test now." Dr. Myers called Matthew at 7:30 the next morning, her voice urgent despite the early hour. "I got your video. The Portland Parasitology Lab will see you today if you can make it there. I've also contacted a colleague who specializes in tropical medicine, and he's interested in consulting on your case." Matthew didn't hesitate. Despite Emma's pregnancy complications, she insisted on coming with him. "I'm not letting you face this alone," she said firmly, packing a small overnight bag. "I've already arranged for a substitute at school." The drive to Portland took just over 3 hours. The specialized lab was located on the 3rd floor of a medical research building, a sterile environment with white walls, stainless steel equipment, and the sharp scent of disinfectant. It was a far cry from the cheerfully decorated doctor's offices Matthew had become accustomed to visiting. Dr. Lawrence Chen, a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed Matthew's file before examining him. "The video you sent is quite remarkable," he said after thoroughly examining Matthew's inflamed torso. The early hour. "I got your video. The Portland Parasitology Lab will see you today if you can make it there. I've also contacted a colleague who specializes in tropical medicine, and he's interested in consulting on your case." Matthew didn't hesitate. Despite Emma's pregnancy complications, she insisted on coming with him. "I'm not letting you face this alone," she said firmly, packing a small overnight bag. "I've already arranged for a substitute at school." The drive to Portland took just over 3 hours. The specialized lab was located on the 3rd floor of a medical research building, a sterile environment with white walls, stainless steel equipment, and the sharp scent of disinfectant. It was a far cry from the cheerfully decorated doctor's offices Matthew had become accustomed to visiting. Dr. Lawrence Chen, a meticulous man with wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed Matthew's file before examining him. "The video you sent is quite remarkable," he said after thoroughly examining Matthew's inflamed torso. "Based on your occupation and symptoms, Anisaki's is definitely a strong candidate, but we need definitive identification through blood work and tissue sampling." "Tissue sampling?" Matthew repeated, his stomach dropping. Dr. Chen nodded. "Extracting an intact parasite allows us to identify it precisely and determine the optimal treatment protocol." He gestured toward a room where technicians were preparing equipment. "We'll need to make a small incision in one of the active areas to extract the organism. Local anesthesia is required, but it's a minor surgical procedure." The brightly lit procedure room had a surgical table in the center. Emma was asked to wait outside, as pregnant women weren't permitted in the area. Matthew's heart raced as he lay back on the table, Dr. Chen calmly explaining each step of the process. "We've identified an active migration trail beneath your right rib cage," Dr. Chen explained as he prepared the local anesthetic. "Once you're completely numb, you may feel some pressure, but no pain." Matthew closed his eyes and tried to focus on his breathing, the way he did during the most intense dinner services. The needle delivering the anesthesia was uncomfortable, as expected, but the pressure sensation that followed was more psychologically disturbing than physically painful. After several minutes of careful work, Dr. Chen announced, "We have one." Matthew didn't look as the technician transferred something to a specimen container. The thought of seeing the thing that had been living inside him, feeding off his tissues, made bile rise in his throat. The rest of the examination proceeded quickly. Blood draws, skin biopsies, and comprehensive photographing of all affected areas. Matthew found Dr. Chen's professional detachment oddly comforting. This wasn't a mysterious condition, it was a known parasite with an established treatment protocol. By late afternoon, preliminary results were available. Dr. Chen confirmed it after reviewing the data. "You have an Anisaki's simplex infection, most likely contracted from consuming undercooked or raw fish. The parasite's natural hosts are marine mammals, but humans can become accidental hosts through infected fish consumption." "Is this common?" Matthew asked, feeling somehow violated by the invasion of his body. "More common than reported, especially among sushi chefs and fish handlers. Many cases are misdiagnosed as allergic reactions or unexplained skin conditions," Dr. Chen said, removing his glasses. "Fortunately, we can treat this. Unfortunately, the treatment is intensive and can have significant side effects. The treatment protocol would require hospitalization, intravenous antiparasitic medications for several days, and possible surgical removal of any parasites that had migrated to tissue sites. Side effects could include severe nausea, liver stress, and rare but serious allergic reactions to dying parasites. Is there someone who can support you through this process, especially given your wife's condition?" Dr. Chen asked. The treatment would require several days in the hospital, away from Emma when she needed him most. Before Matthew could answer, his phone rang with Emma's distinctive ringtone. He excused himself to take the call in the hallway. "Matt," Emma's voice was filled with fear. "I think I'm in labor. My water broke in the waiting room." The world seemed to tilt. Emma was only 34 weeks along. The baby wasn't ready. They weren't ready. And they were 3 hours from home in an unfamiliar city. "Don't move," Matthew said, rushing toward the waiting room, his diagnosis temporarily forgotten. "I'm coming right now." The next hour was a blur. Emma was transported by ambulance to Portland Metropolitan Hospital, while Dr. Chen quickly briefed the obstetrics team about Matthew's parasitic infection and recommended precautions. By the time Matthew arrived at the maternity ward, Emma was being prepped for delivery. "The baby's heart rate is distressed, and we need to move quickly," the obstetrician explained. "Your wife has developed severe preeclampsia, and her blood pressure is dangerously high." Standing frozen in the delivery room doorway, Matthew faced an impossible choice. Dr. Chen had made it clear that his treatment needed to begin immediately to prevent further parasite migration. The protocol required him to be at the infectious disease unit across town. But Emma needed him here for the premature birth of their child. "Mr. Sinclair," a nurse touched his arm gently. "Are you coming in? You need to scrub up and gown." Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text. It was Tyler, just arrived at Portland Hospital parking lot. "Where are you?" Matthew hadn't remembered texting Tyler about the Portland trip that morning, but his friend had offered to drive up after his shift. A desperate plan formed quickly. Tyler could be with Emma during the birth while Matthew received treatment. They could video call so Matthew could witness their daughter's arrival. It was a terrible compromise, but the only option given the urgency of both situations. "Tell her I love her," Matthew said to the nurse, his voice breaking. "Tell her I'm so sorry." Tyler nodded grimly when Matthew explained the situation. "She'll understand, man. You're fighting for your life too." As the infectious disease transport took Matthew to their unit, his heart remained with Emma while his body was carried in the opposite direction. To prevent cross-contamination, the treatment facility was isolated and sterile. Matthew clutched his phone, waiting for Tyler's updates while nurses started his foreline. The first antiparasitic medication hit his system like acid. He'd been warned about the side effects, but nothing could have prepared him for the violent reaction. As he vomited for the first time, Tyler's video call lit up his phone. Through a haze of pain and medication, Matthew watched Emma deliver their daughter. The NICU team immediately took the small, premature baby, her weak cry barely audible as she searched the room with unfocused eyes. Emma, flushed with exhaustion and worry, looked around desperately. Tyler turned the phone so she could see Matthew. When she called his name, Matthew managed to whisper through another wave of nausea, "I'm here, Emma. You did it, beautiful. I'm here." "They're taking her to the NICU," Emma said, tears streaming. "She's so small, Matt. But she's fighting." "Like her mom," Matthew said, forcing confidence he didn't feel as the medication dragged him under. "I love you both. I'm going to get better and come to you." Matthew succumbed to the treatment's devastating side effects after the call ended. His last thought as consciousness faded was of his newborn daughter entering the world while he fought to stay in it, both of them battling forces beyond their control. His sedated dreams brought back fragments of the anniversary dinner, the exquisite taste of the bluefin tuna, his joy at creating the perfect meal. Somewhere in those memories was the moment when an invisible invader had entered his body and begun its destructive journey. As consciousness slipped away, one thought crystallized. He needed to understand how this had happened, not just for himself, but to protect others from the same fate. The pain came in waves. Each dose of antiparasitic medication triggered severe reactions as dead and dying parasites released toxins into Matthew's bloodstream. His doctors had warned him about the side effects, but experiencing them was worse than anything he could have imagined. He drifted in and out of consciousness for 3 days, aware only of the burning sensation coursing through his body and the concerned voices of medical professionals monitoring his progress. On day 4, the worst effects began to subside, leaving him weak but lucid enough to understand his next phase of treatment. The infectious disease specialist overseeing his care, Dr. Reyes, was brutally honest about what lay ahead. The medication eliminated most of the parasites, but some have established deeper tissue migration routes, particularly in your facial area. These need to be surgically removed to prevent permanent damage and reinfection. Matthew gingerly touched the inflamed areas on his jawline and right cheek. "How bad will it be?" Dr. Reyes didn't sugarcoat it. "We'll need to make multiple incisions to locate and remove the remaining parasites. There will be scarring. The extent depends on how deeply they've embedded and how well your tissue heals." The surgery lasted 4 hours. When Matthew first saw himself in his hospital room's bathroom mirror, he barely recognized the face staring back. Angry red incision lines held together with black stitches ran across his right cheek and jaw. The surrounding tissue was swollen and discolored. The doctors assured him that most of the obvious damage would heal, but some scarring would be permanent. "Your career," he whispered to his reflection. In fine dining, appearance mattered. Executive chefs weren't just cooks, they were the face of their restaurants, appearing in food magazines and television interviews. Marcus had been grooming him for exactly that kind of exposure. Could that still be possible with a face scarred by parasites? Matthew relied on Tyler's daily visits for connection to the outside world. His friend brought updates from the restaurant, carefully edited to spare his feelings but honest enough to maintain trust. Marcus has promoted Adrian to acting executive chef, Tyler reported one day. It's temporary, but he needs to keep the restaurant running. Yeah, I understand, Matthew finished, though understanding didn't make it hurt less. Tyler couldn't soften the news about Emma and the baby. Clara Elizabeth Sinclair had been born weighing 4 pounds, 3 ounces, with underdeveloped lungs. She was stable but would need NICU care for several more weeks. Emma was recovering from an emergency C-section related to her preeclampsia complications. After being discharged from Portland Hospital, she'd refused to return to Seattle without Matthew or Clara. She's staying at a motel near the Children's Hospital, Tyler explained. Her parents flew in to be with her. The mention of Emma's parents was like a knife twist. Robert and Diane Collins had never hidden their disappointment that their daughter, a brilliant nursing student with a Johns Hopkins acceptance letter, had married a chef with irregular hours and uncertain prospects. They'd been polite but distant throughout the marriage, their warmth replaced by careful politeness. Have they seen Clara? Matthew asked, hating how vulnerable the question made him feel. Tyler nodded. They visit her every day. Emma sends me pictures to share with you. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a recent photo of a tiny baby surrounded by monitors and tubes in an incubator. The NICU lighting made her skin look translucent. Matthew choked back tears. His daughter was fighting just to survive, and he couldn't even hold her. The infectious disease team said he'd remain contagious until all parasites were eliminated, which could take another week. The doctors say she's responding well to treatment, Tyler offered. Her oxygen levels are improving. It wasn't enough. No amount of progress could make up for the fact that Matthew should have been there, holding Emma's hand, protecting his daughter, making things right for his family. Instead, he was trapped in a hospital room 40 miles away, his body still a battleground for invaders he'd unknowingly invited in through his professional arrogance. The financial reality of their situation became brutally apparent when the first bills arrived. Emma's delivery and Clara's NICU care were covered by insurance, but the out-of-pocket costs were staggering. Matthew's treatment, denied by their insurance company, would bankrupt them. Add the hotel costs for Emma's extended stay in Portland, the lost income from both of their medical leaves, and mortgage payments that wouldn't pause for their crisis, and they were drowning. We're going to lose the house, Matthew said during an emergency video call with their financial advisor. There's no way around it, is there? The advisor looked uncomfortable. We might have some unexplored options, but just give me the truth, Matthew interrupted. Neither of us is working, our premature baby is in the NICU, medical expenses are approaching 6 figures, and we can barely handle the mortgage payments alone. The silence that followed was confirmation enough. Their carefully constructed life was collapsing, and Matthew knew it was largely his fault. Maybe if he'd been more careful, followed the food safety protocols he taught to his own kitchen staff, listened to Emma's concerns earlier, none of this would have happened. Another devastating blow came when Emma's father requested his first video call. When Robert Collins's stern face appeared on the screen, Matthew braced himself. Matthew, Robert began, his tone barely containing judgment. Emma doesn't know I'm calling. She's with Clara now. Is everything okay? Matthew asked quickly, worried about his daughter. The baby is stable, Robert said. But Emma is exhausted, stressed, and handling everything alone while you're indisposed. The slight pause revealed his father-in-law's assessment of Matthew's condition. After much discussion, Diane and I think Emma and Clara should come live with us once the baby is discharged. Live with you? Matthew couldn't hide his shocked tone. Robert nodded. In Boston. We have the space, the resources, and the stability Emma needs right now. Boston Children's Hospital can provide Clara's ongoing medical care, and Emma won't have to worry about finances on top of everything else. Matthew struggled to keep his voice steady. This is temporary. We're going through a rough patch, but we'll recover. Robert's expression remained impassive. Will you? Even without the health issues, the restaurant industry is notoriously unstable. But now, with your condition. He gestured vaguely toward Matthew's scarred face. Perhaps it's time to take a more realistic approach. For Emma's sake. For Clara's. The suggestion cut deeper than any surgery. Was his father-in-law suggesting Emma leave him? Or simply that she stay with her parents until Matthew could rebuild their lives, which now seemed impossible? "I appreciate your concern," Matthew said. "But Emma and I need to make this decision together." Robert's expression softened slightly. "Of course. I'm simply offering an option. Emma loves you and won't leave unless you encourage her to do what's best for your child." After hanging up, Matthew sat alone in his hospital room, feeling the full weight of his circumstances crash over him. He'd failed as a chef, as a husband, as a father, and as a basic provider. His once promising career had exposed him to a parasite that threatened everything he loved. His facial scars were just the visible reminder of deeper wounds to his pride, his identity, and his future. That night, for the first time since childhood, Matthew cried. He sobbed for the tiny daughter he couldn't hold, the wife he'd failed to protect, the home they would lose, and the dreams that seemed impossibly out of reach. Without witnesses, he allowed himself to fully experience his grief. But in the sterile silence of the hospital room, another emotion began to emerge alongside the sadness: anger. By dawn, he was furious. Not just at the parasite that had invaded his body, but at the systematic failures that had allowed it to happen. The restaurant industry's casual attitude toward certain risks. The insurance company's callous denial of coverage. The medical establishment's months-long dismissal of his symptoms. These were institutional problems, not just personal misfortune. Most of all, he was angry at his own hubris, the arrogance that made him believe his skill and experience made him immune to the hazards of his profession. That anger was strangely energizing, because it gave him something to focus on besides his personal suffering. As the infectious disease team worked to eliminate the remaining parasites and monitor his blood work for complete clearance, Matthew began asking more pointed questions. Where did parasites commonly originate? How could fish be definitively tested for infection before consumption? What were the industry-standard preventive measures? The answers infuriated him. Preventive measures were straightforward. Parasites could be killed by freezing at specific temperatures for designated periods before they could infect humans. The problem was that the pursuit of freshness often overrode these safety measures, especially at high-end establishments where chefs prided themselves on serving fish that had never been frozen. Dr. Reyes called it culinary Russian roulette, with characteristic bluntness. Most of the time you're fine, but eventually the odds catch up with you. Learning how those odds had caught up with Matthew Sinclair in the most devastating way possible, he made a silent vow in his hospital bed, face-scarred and future uncertain. He would prevent this from happening to others, whatever the cost to his culinary career. Matthew was discharged from the infectious disease unit 10 days after his surgery. The parasites were gone, but their legacy remained etched across his face and torso. Dr. Reyes sent him home with strict aftercare instructions, a follow-up schedule, and a thick folder of medical documentation for future insurance battles. "You're fortunate," Dr. Reyes said during their final consultation. "In severe cases, anisakis can damage nerves or perforate the intestinal wall. You managed to keep most parasites in subcutaneous tissue." Matthew wouldn't have called his situation fortunate, but he understood the doctor's perspective. He'd survived. Others with similar infections hadn't been so lucky. Tyler drove him to the Children's Hospital NICU where Clara was being cared for. After extensive screening to ensure he was no longer infectious, Matthew was finally able to see his daughter for the first time. The NICU was eerily quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and hushed voices of nurses. Emma was there, sitting beside their incubator-bound daughter. After nearly 2 weeks apart, seeing his wife was almost as overwhelming as seeing Clara. Emma looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and the pale complexion that comes from sleepless nights spent in hospital chairs. But when she spotted Matthew, her face lit up with a smile of relief that made all her exhaustion disappear. "You're here," she whispered, embracing him carefully, mindful of his healing scars. "You're finally here." Matthew held her, inhaling the familiar scent of her hair. "I'm sorry about everything," he whispered back. Emma pulled back to look at his face, her fingertips tracing near the angry red lines on his cheek. "Don't apologize. None of this is your fault." But Matthew could see the doubt in her eyes as she assessed his scarring. Emma couldn't say it, but there was fear there too. Fear about what these physical reminders would mean for him, for them, for their future. Emma led him to the incubator. "She's been waiting for you," she said. The nurses call her their most determined little fighter. Clara Elizabeth Sinclair looked impossibly small, dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding her. Yet as Matthew approached, She opened her dark blue eyes, so much like Emma's, and seemed to look directly at him. In that moment, all the pain from the past months, all the worry about the future, faded away. What mattered was this fragile new life, and he would do whatever it took to protect her. Can I touch her?" he asked the nearest nurse. "Open the portholes and put your hands inside," she said kindly. "She's stable enough for contact." Matthew gently touched his daughter's tiny fingers through the incubator's access ports. Clara gripped his fingertip with surprising strength, and the sensation shot straight to his heart. "She knows you're her daddy," Emma whispered. For several minutes, the three of them were simply a family, connected for the first time, bound together by love and determination despite the medical obstacles surrounding them. Tyler, who had been quietly waiting in the hallway, broke the peaceful moment with news that would shatter it completely. "Matt," he said hesitantly as he entered the room, "I need to tell you something. I should have told you months ago." Matthew was alerted by Tyler's serious tone. "What is it?" Tyler looked at Emma, then at Matthew. "It's about the bluefin tuna I helped you get for your anniversary dinner." Matthew felt a chill unrelated to the hospital's air conditioning. "What about it?" Tyler's guilt-ridden expression revealed everything before he spoke. "It wasn't from our regular suppliers. I got it from a dock worker I know. He sometimes gets fish off boats before they go through normal distribution channels. He got us that incredible bluefin at a great price." "You mean it wasn't inspected?" Matthew asked, though he already knew the answer. Tyler nodded miserably. "No inspection, no parasite killing freezing. Straight from boat to us. I thought it would be fine. The fish looked perfect, and we've done it before with other fish without any problems." The news hit Matthew like a physical blow. His illness, which had caused his family so much suffering, wasn't a random occupational hazard or unavoidable accident. It was the direct result of a deliberate shortcut taken by his best friend. "Why would you do that?" Matthew asked, unable to keep the pain from his voice. "You know the procedures. You know why they exist." "It was for your special meal," Tyler said, as if that justified everything. "You wanted the absolute best. This business, the really exceptional stuff, only comes that way." Matthew turned back to the incubator where his tiny daughter still struggled, surrounded by medical equipment, every tube and monitor representing another day she'd spend in this sterile environment instead of at home in the nursery they'd carefully prepared. All of it stemming from that one decision to bypass food safety regulations. "I think you should leave," Matthew whispered, not turning around. "Matt, please. Not now, Tyler. I can't deal with this right now." Emma touched Matthew's arm as Tyler left. Despite his terrible mistake, he didn't mean for this to happen. Matthew nodded but said, "I know. But I need time to process this." Still holding his finger, he looked down at Clara. "I need to focus on my family." The next day, while Emma was resting at the hotel and Matthew was alone with Clara, a nurse brought an unexpected delivery. "You received a package at the front desk from Mrs. Sinclair. She said you should see it immediately." Inside was Emma's laptop and a handwritten note. "Open the restaurant folder. You need to see what I found. Love, E." The folder contained dozens of documents related to the restaurant group, emails, memos, and medical records. As Matthew scrolled through the files, a disturbing pattern emerged. At least 7 restaurant employees had experienced parasitic symptoms over the past 5 years. The company had handled each case internally, providing private medical care and financial settlements in exchange for non-disclosure agreements. Most chilling was an email from Marcus to the restaurant group's legal team, sent just 2 weeks after Matthew's symptoms began. Possible Anasaki's case at flagship location. Executive chef affected. Recommend full private medical coverage per established protocol. Arrange appropriate settlement and strong NDA to keep this confidential. Previous cases handled quietly. Matthew stared at the screen in disbelief. Marcus had known. He'd seen similar symptoms in other chefs before. Instead of warning Matthew, instead of getting him immediate medical attention, Marcus had planned to buy Matthew's silence to protect the restaurant's reputation, following the company's established damage control strategy. Matthew's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler as the implications sank in. "Just got fired. Marcus found out I told you about the bluefin. Says I violated supplier confidentiality. I deserve it, But they're trying to contain this. The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Tyler's repeated violations with unauthorized seafood sourcing weren't isolated incidents. The restaurant company was likely doing this regularly, part of a culture that valued fresh, never frozen, fish over staff and customer safety. As Matthew processed this betrayal, another memory surfaced from the chaos of recent weeks. He'd eaten more raw fish that week than just the bluefin tuna. 3 days before his anniversary dinner, he'd gone fishing with Emma's brother Michael, who was visiting from Boston. Matthew had proudly prepared sashimi on the boat from salmon they'd caught, serving it to his brother-in-law with soy sauce and wasabi on a makeshift cutting board balanced on a small cooler lid. Matthew's hands shook as he realized the implications. If the parasite hadn't come from the bluefin, what if he'd infected himself with fish he'd caught and prepared personally, without any of the commercial safety measures he relied on at the restaurant? He called Dr. Reyes immediately. After Matthew recounted his fishing trip and the timing of his symptoms, Dr. Reyes confirmed both scenarios were feasible. Anisaki's symptoms can take days to appear after initial infection. Without examining samples from both fish sources, which is impossible at this point, we can't pinpoint the exact origin. The ambiguity both bothered and liberated Matthew. Tyler had violated professional ethics, but he might not have been responsible for Matthew's infection. Even if Matthew couldn't prove the restaurant group had caused his specific case, they had clearly covered up a systematic problem. But the entire incident represented a serious failure of restaurant food safety standards, government oversight, and his own personal practices, cutting corners for culinary pride and profit that put people at risk. While Matthew was processing these revelations, his phone rang with an unknown number. The caller introduced himself as FDA investigator James Parker from the Office of Human and Animal Food Operations. Mr. Sinclair, we've received complaints suggesting the restaurant group you worked for may have violated food safety regulations in their handling of raw seafood. You may have relevant information about these practices. Matthew's heart raced. Who contacted you? We take these complaints seriously, but I can't disclose sources, Parker replied. We've begun preliminary inspections at the flagship location. After the call ended, Matthew received an email from an unknown sender with the subject line, "You're not alone." The message contained a link to a private forum where food service workers discussed parasitic infections and other occupational hazards. Many shared stories remarkably similar to Matthew's: doctors dismissing symptoms, companies pressuring employees into silence, and financial ruin from uncovered medical bills. Matthew noticed the most recent post: FDA finally showed up at Seattle Restaurant Group. Full team inspecting everything. About damn time. The message included a link to a news article posted just hours earlier. FDA investigates high-end Seattle Restaurant Group following food safety allegations. The story quoted anonymous sources claiming the restaurant chain had repeatedly violated seafood handling regulations and covered up staff illnesses. Matthew's phone rang again, lighting up with Marcus's name. "What did you do?" Marcus demanded without preamble. "The FDA is swarming my restaurants. They're asking about parasites and staff illnesses." "I didn't call the FDA," Matthew replied truthfully. "Who did?" "That ungrateful. I don't know who called them," Matthew cut in, "but I know why. People are getting sick, Marcus. I nearly died. The stress on my wife caused our daughter to be born premature. It looks like this has been happening to other people under your watch." There was a long silence before Marcus spoke again. His tone shifted from angry to calculated. "Look, it seems we have a significant misunderstanding here, Matt. The restaurant group has always prioritized food safety and employee health. I wasn't aware of any systematic failures. We need to present a united front while addressing any legitimate concerns." "A united front?" Matthew repeated. "Like the NDA's other affected employees signed," Marcus continued. Another pause. "You don't know about internal procedures. Maybe we should meet in person. The restaurant group is prepared to offer you a generous settlement, covering all medical expenses for you and your family. We just need discretion while we address these regulatory issues." It was a bribe disguised as a settlement offer, payment for his silence. Marcus was offering Matthew the financial security his family desperately needed most. Matthew stood in the NICU, watching his daughter fight for every breath, knowing the medical bills would soon overwhelm them completely. The temptation was enormous. Matthew found his answer as Clara's tiny hand wrapped around his finger again. Marcus, I'm not interested in discretion. I want the truth, and I think everyone else deserves to know what's really happening in high-end kitchens like yours. 6 months after the FDA investigation began, Matthew stood before an audience of culinary students, restaurant professionals, and food safety officials in a Seattle Convention Center conference room. The scars on his face had faded from angry red to faint silver lines, still visible but no longer inflamed. When I was young, ambitious, and certain I would be the next great American chef, he began, adjusting the microphone and looking out at the eager faces, no one warned me that my career might literally kill me. No one told me that the pursuit of culinary excellence could endanger my health, my family, and my future. Today I want to share something I wish someone had told me. The journey to this moment had been difficult. Matthew had become a key witness in the FDA's investigation of the restaurant group after rejecting Marcus's private settlement offer. The investigation rapidly expanded beyond seafood handling to encompass multiple corporate violations. Documents revealed a systematic pattern of food safety breaches, combined with legal intimidation and financial incentives to silence whistleblowers. The investigation resulted in record fines for the regional restaurant group, the closure of 2 locations including the flagship, and criminal charges against several executives, including Marcus. Matthew's case had been the catalyst that exposed these violations, making national news headlines. While the investigation unfolded, Matthew and Emma fought their own battles. Clara had remained in the NICU for 6 weeks until she reached the 4-pound discharge requirement. The day they brought her home, not to their Ballard Craftsman house, which they'd had to sell, but to a small 2-bedroom apartment they could afford on their drastically reduced income, was bittersweet. The joy of finally having their daughter home was tempered by their reduced circumstances and uncertain future. The financial devastation had been severe. Even with a successful crowdfunding campaign organized by sympathetic former colleagues, the medical expenses had forced them into bankruptcy. Emma had returned to nursing earlier than planned, working night shifts at a local hospital so Matthew could care for Clara during the day while he figured out his next path. Their savings were gone, their credit destroyed, their professional reputations forever changed. Despite these challenges, unexpected support had emerged. The chef community, known for its fierce competition and poor working conditions, had rallied around them. Former line cooks, pastry chefs, and culinary students sent cards, brought food, and offered childcare. Several celebrity chefs had spoken publicly about occupational hazards in their industry, sparking broader conversations about necessary reforms. The most surprising reconciliation had been with Tyler. The initial betrayal had been devastating, but as Matthew learned about the industry's systematic problems, he'd realized his friend had been caught up in the same toxic culture that had nearly destroyed them both. Their friendship would never be the same, but they'd found a way forward by working to change the practices that had almost killed them. "We chefs are driven by passion," Matthew told his audience. "We work long hours in dangerous conditions because we love creating food, crafting experiences, and the adrenaline rush of perfect service. But that same passion has been exploited to justify harmful practices and unreasonable demands. We're told that questioning these traditions means we're not tough enough, that real chefs take risks, and that success requires sacrifice." He paused, taking a sip of water, feeling the weight of his next words. "I believed that. I lived it. I nearly lost everything because of it." Emma nodded encouragingly from the front row, holding Clara. At 6 months old, despite the chaos and unusual surroundings, she was smaller than average but thriving, with delicate features that resembled both parents. The developmental delays predicted by doctors hadn't materialized. Clara showed every sign of being a bright, alert, and determined little person, qualities that had helped her survive her traumatic start in life. "My healing didn't begin with medical treatment," Matthew continued. "It started when I was contacted by Richard Williams, whose son had died 3 years earlier from an Anisaki's infection he contracted working as a line cook at one of Seattle's premier sushi restaurants. The call had come unexpectedly while Matthew was still considering his career options. Richard Williams had seen the news coverage of the restaurant group investigation and recognized his son's story in Matthew's. The difference was that his son Jason had died when a long undiagnosed parasitic infection caused fatal intestinal perforation. "Mr. Williams showed me his son's illness diary," Matthew said, his voice heavy with emotion. Page after page documenting symptoms identical to mine, doctor visits that dismissed his concerns, and workplace pressure to remain silent. The final entry was written just 2 days before he died, when he was too weak to work but still afraid of losing his restaurant job. The diary had been part of a wrongful death lawsuit that the restaurant had settled out of court without admitting fault. The settlement had included an NDA that prevented the Williams family from discussing Jason's death publicly. The restaurant that had employed their son continued to receive accolades for its traditional preparation methods while they grieved in silence for 3 years. "Meeting the Williams family transformed me," Matthew said. "I realized that my suffering wasn't isolated. Unless someone spoke up, it would continue claiming victims. That's when I decided to advocate for change, regardless of the consequences to my culinary career." The decision had repercussions. Many in the culinary community viewed Matthew as a traitor who'd broken the unspoken code that kept the industry's darkest secrets hidden. Former colleagues avoided him. Potential employers were afraid to hire a known whistleblower rather than a chef. But others had reached out in solidarity. He'd been invited to teach about occupational risks and safety advocacy at a prestigious culinary school. A food safety NGO had offered him an industry liaison position. Most importantly, a group of ethical restaurant investors had asked him to consult on a new concept that prioritized worker well-being and authentic culinary experiences without compromise. "Change is possible without sacrificing quality or authenticity," Matthew assured his audience. "Proper freezing protocols for raw fish don't compromise the product. Reasonable working hours don't diminish a chef's skill. Prioritizing safety doesn't devalue creativity or tradition." He pointed to slides showing modern food safety equipment and preparation techniques. "The restaurant where I'll be culinary director next month is implementing these principles. Every dish we serve will meet or exceed safety standards while still delivering the experience our guests expect. And our entire team will receive comprehensive training on occupational risks and workers' rights." Murmurs rippled through the audience. After months of speculation, Matthew's return to restaurants was confirmed. The project had developed slowly. The investor group, led by a tech executive who'd had his own parasite scare after a business dinner, had been formed following the FDA investigation and media coverage. They were committed to creating a model that other establishments could replicate. "My role will be different from a traditional executive chef," Matthew explained. "I'll develop menus and train staff, but I'll also work with health officials and industry groups to establish best practices. Since our operational model starts with reasonable schedules, I'll be home for dinner with my family most nights." Emma smiled at the family reference. Their marriage had been tested over the past months, especially during Matthew's darkest period when he believed he'd destroyed their future. Emma's unwavering support and practical resilience had been crucial to his healing, and her nursing skills had proved invaluable throughout their ordeal. The experience had strengthened their partnership in ways they'd never expected, making their bond feel unbreakable. "I want to acknowledge my wife Emma's incredible strength," Matthew added, his tone softening. "She inspired me and supported me through this. She never lost sight of what we had and what we could build together, while I was focused on what I'd lost." Emma hadn't just helped him recover, she'd helped expose the systematic negligence at the restaurant group. Her medical training had allowed her to spot inconsistencies in the documents they'd gathered, and her methodical evidence collection had provided key material for the FDA investigation. "If we don't speak up, someone else will suffer the same way or worse," Emma had said when Matthew had hesitated about sharing their story, worried about their already precarious financial situation. "My most important lesson," Matthew told his audience, "is that professional excellence can never come at the expense of health and safety, for chefs, for workers, or for guests. Don't celebrate or perpetuate a culture that says otherwise. That culture needs to change." The presentation concluded with a comprehensive explanation of the Matthew Food Safety Foundation, established with the Williams family. The Jason Williams Foundation would provide education, legal assistance, and financial support to food service workers suffering from occupational diseases and injuries. A percentage of the new restaurant's profits would fund the foundation, creating a sustainable support model that other restaurants could adopt. As the audience gave him a standing ovation, Matthew felt a complex mixture of emotions. He was proud of what he'd accomplished, grateful for the support, and still grieving what had been lost. His facial scars would always remind him of his ordeal, but they no longer defined him. They were simply part of a larger story that had transformed from tragedy to advocacy. During the question and answer session after his presentation, a young culinary student approached him, tears in her eyes. "My brother worked at the restaurant group 2 years ago," she said. He got sick like you did. The restaurant paid for private treatment and made him sign confidentiality agreements. He was never the same afterward. He gave up cooking entirely. Thank you for speaking up when he couldn't. As Matthew's story continued to circulate, encounters like this became more frequent. Each one reinforced his resolve to continue on his chosen path despite its risks. His experience had given people hope and permission to acknowledge their own suffering and seek better conditions. The culture of silence was beginning to crack. That evening, Matthew sat in the rocking chair next to Clara's crib in their modest apartment, watching his daughter sleep peacefully. Emma joined him, perching on the chair's arm and resting her head against his shoulder. "You were amazing today," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." "I couldn't have done any of this without you," Matthew replied, taking her hand. "Sometimes I can't believe how much our lives have changed in just 1 year." Emma gestured toward their sleeping daughter. "Not all the changes have been terrible," she said softly. "Some have been perfect," Matthew agreed, feeling gratitude so intense it almost hurt. They'd sacrificed their financial security, their professional status, and their comfortable future, but they'd gained purpose, perspective, and a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. "The restaurant's soft opening is next week," Matthew said. "Are you nervous about your parents?" Emma grinned. "Actually, they're coming around. Dad was bragging to his golf buddies about his warrior son-in-law last weekend. I never thought I'd see the day." Emma's parents' reconciliation had been another surprise. Robert and Diane Collins had initially wanted to rescue their daughter from what they saw as a failing marriage to a reckless chef. But after learning about Matthew's infection, its systematic causes, and his determination to prevent others from suffering the same fate, their perspective had completely shifted. They'd even made a substantial anonymous donation to the Williams Foundation, demonstrating their growing respect for their son-in-law. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Matthew asked, meaning more than just financially. Emma kissed him softly, careful to avoid his sensitive scars. "We already are." Matthew reflected on the strange journey they'd taken. A year ago, he'd been ambitious, driven by professional accolades, and certain of his direction. Now his priorities and definition of success had been fundamentally altered, giving him a sense of purpose he'd never experienced before. The parasite that had invaded his body had taken so much from him, but it had also revealed truths he might never have discovered otherwise. In fighting for his life, confronting his deepest fears, and rebuilding from the ruins of his former existence, he'd found strengths he didn't know he possessed and created something more meaningful than anything he could have imagined. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, final preparations for the restaurant opening, foundation partnership meetings, and continued therapy for both his physical recovery and Clara's ongoing development. But tonight, in this quiet moment with his family, Matthew Sinclair was finally at peace with his life's unexpected direction, scars and all. We often think we've learned life's lessons and achieved safety as we get older. Matthew Sinclair's story demonstrates that hubris can be our greatest vulnerability, regardless of age or expertise. How many of us have dismissed a doctor's warning, ignored persistent discomfort, or compromised our health for the sake of convenience or professional pride? Matthew's journey from the pinnacle of culinary success to near death and back again reveals uncomfortable truths about the prices we pay for our ambitions. He nearly lost his career, his health, and his home, but he discovered what many of us learned too late. Our greatest legacy isn't professional achievement or financial accumulation. Like the wisdom lines etched on our faces, his scars tell a story of suffering transformed into purpose. When we face health crises or financial disasters that threaten our hard-earned stability, remember Matthew's resilience. It's never too late to turn personal tragedy into meaningful change that protects others, whether that means fighting insurance companies, advocating for proper medical care, or rebuilding life after devastating illness. The restaurant industry Matthew entered as a young chef was built on a culture of silence, where questioning dangerous practices was seen as weakness, where loyalty meant suffering in silence, and where the pursuit of perfection justified any risk. But cultures can change when brave individuals refuse to accept the unacceptable. Matthew's story isn't just about parasites or restaurant safety. It's about the courage to speak truth to power when everything you've worked for is on the line. It's about the strength of partnerships that survive the most brutal tests. It's about finding purpose in pain and meaning in suffering. Today, Matthew's new restaurant operates under principles that would have seemed impossible in his old career. Transparency about ingredients and sourcing, fair wages and reasonable hours for all staff, comprehensive health coverage including occupational injury protection, and a commitment to food safety that never compromises for the sake of novelty or profit. The restaurant industry is slowly changing, partly because of advocates like Matthew who refuse to stay silent. Food safety protocols are being strengthened. Worker protection laws are being updated. Insurance companies are being held accountable for their coverage decisions. Medical professionals are receiving better training to recognize occupational illnesses. But the most important change is happening in individual hearts and minds. Young chefs entering the industry now have examples of professionals who prioritized long-term health over short-term gains. They have proof that speaking up about dangerous conditions isn't career suicide, it's career evolution. Matthew's daughter Clara is now a healthy, vibrant toddler who knows nothing about the struggles that marked her earliest days. She runs through the restaurant's dining room during family meals, charming guests and reminding everyone why all the fighting was worthwhile. Her laughter echoes through the same kitchen where her father nearly lost everything, now transformed into a place where safety and excellence coexist. Emma returned to her teaching career with a new understanding of advocacy and systemic change. She speaks at nursing conferences about patient advocacy and the importance of listening to patients when they report unusual symptoms. Her experience supporting Matthew through his illness taught her lessons about resilience that she now shares with others facing their own medical crises. Tyler eventually found work at another restaurant, one that prioritizes ethical sourcing and worker safety. His friendship with Matthew slowly healed as they both worked to change the industry that had nearly destroyed them. They speak regularly about the need for reform, and Tyler has become an advocate for supply chain transparency in his new position. The Williams family found peace through the foundation established in their son Jason's memory. Richard Williams, who had grieved in isolation for years due to legal restrictions, now travels the country sharing his son's story and warning others about the hidden dangers in seemingly safe workplaces. His advocacy has prevented other families from experiencing the same loss. Dr. Myers, the young physician who first took Matthew's symptoms seriously, has become a leading researcher in occupational health for food service workers. Her work has helped establish better diagnostic protocols for parasitic infections and improved training for emergency room staff who might encounter these rare but serious conditions. The former restaurant group that employed Matthew faced not just legal consequences but reputational devastation. Several locations closed permanently, and the remaining establishments struggled to rebuild trust with both employees and customers. The case became a cautionary tale in business schools about the long-term costs of prioritizing short-term profits over worker safety. Marcus, the former owner who had tried to silence Matthew with financial settlements, faced both criminal charges and civil lawsuits. His conviction on charges related to worker endangerment and obstruction of justice sent a clear message to other restaurant owners. The days of covering up occupational illnesses were ending. The Food Safety Foundation that bears Jason Williams's name has grown beyond anyone's expectations. It now provides services to food service workers nationwide, offering everything from legal assistance and medical advocacy to financial support during recovery periods. The foundation has helped hundreds of workers get proper diagnoses and treatment for occupational illnesses that might otherwise have been ignored or misdiagnosed. Most importantly, the foundation works proactively to prevent illnesses before they occur. They provide education about occupational hazards, advocate for stronger safety regulations, and support research into better protective equipment and procedures. Their motto, "No meal is worth a life," has become a rallying cry for reform throughout the industry. Matthew's story has been featured in documentaries, academic papers, and industry publications. But the impact goes beyond media attention. Real change is happening in kitchens across the country, where chefs now question practices that were once accepted without hesitation, where workers feel empowered to speak up about unsafe conditions, and where restaurant owners understand that their legal and ethical obligations extend far beyond serving good food. The culinary schools where Matthew now teaches have integrated occupational safety into their core curricula. Students learn not just how to prepare food, but how to protect themselves and their future employees from the hidden dangers that lurk in even the most prestigious kitchens. They study case studies like Matthew's not as cautionary tales, but as examples of how to respond when systems fail. The new generation of chefs entering the workforce has a different relationship with risk than their predecessors. They understand that true professionalism means protecting not just the quality of the food they serve, but the health and safety of everyone involved in its preparation. They see workplace safety not as a restriction on creativity, but as a foundation that makes sustainable creativity possible. Matthew's facial scars have faded over time, but he's never considered having them surgically removed. They remind him daily of where he's been and why his current work matters. When young chefs ask him about the marks, he tells them the story, not to frighten them, but to arm them with knowledge that might save their lives. The parasites that nearly killed Matthew were invisible until it was almost too late. The systematic problems that allowed his infection to happen were also hidden, buried beneath layers of industry tradition and corporate legal strategies. But once exposed to light, both the biological and institutional parasites began to die. Change in any industry is slow and difficult. There are still restaurants that cut corners on safety, still workers who suffer in silence, still executives who choose profits over people. But the culture of impunity that once protected these practices is cracking. Every worker who speaks up, every lawsuit filed, every regulatory change implemented makes it harder for the next Matthew Sinclair to fall through the cracks. The anniversary dinner that started this entire ordeal was meant to celebrate 5 years of marriage and look forward to the birth of their first child. In a strange way, it accomplished exactly that, just not in the way Matthew originally intended. The parasite that entered his body that night ultimately led to a stronger marriage, tested by crisis and fortified by shared purpose. Clara's early birth and NICU stay were traumatic, but they also revealed the depth of their resilience as a family. Matthew and Emma now celebrate their anniversary differently. Instead of elaborate meals, they spend the day volunteering at the foundation or visiting families dealing with occupational illnesses. They've learned that the most meaningful celebrations come from service to others, not indulgence in personal pleasure. The bluefin tuna that may or may not have been the source of Matthew's infection became a symbol of the broader problems in their industry. Whether Tyler's shortcut with the dock worker was ultimately responsible didn't matter as much as what it represented, a culture where rules were seen as suggestions, where the pursuit of the exceptional justified any risk, and where the consequences of those risks were borne by individuals rather than institutions. Food safety regulations have been strengthened partly because of cases like Matthew's, but enforcement remains inconsistent. The FDA investigation that brought down the restaurant group was thorough and effective, but similar problems persist at other establishments that haven't yet faced scrutiny. Change requires constant vigilance from workers, advocates, and regulators working together. The most profound change in Matthew's life hasn't been professional or financial, it's been spiritual. He's learned that meaning comes not from personal achievement, but from contributing to something larger than himself. The near-death experience forced him to confront his own mortality and consider what kind of legacy he wanted to leave. Now, instead of being remembered as a talented chef who created memorable meals, Matthew will be remembered as someone who used his suffering to protect others. His recipes may be forgotten, but the lives he saved through advocacy will continue to impact generations of food service workers. Emma's transformation has been equally profound. Her experience as a medical advocate during Matthew's illness revealed talents and passions she didn't know she possessed. She's now pursuing additional education in public health, with plans to work on occupational safety issues in healthcare settings. Her nursing background, combined with her personal experience navigating medical systems during a crisis, makes her uniquely qualified to help other families facing similar challenges. Clara's presence has added urgency to all of their advocacy work. Every policy they help change, every worker they assist, every dangerous practice they help eliminate makes the world a little safer for their daughter's generation. She's growing up in a household where service to others isn't just a value, it's a way of life. The financial struggles that followed Matthew's illness were severe, but they taught the family lessons about what truly matters. The house they lost was just a building. Their real home was wherever they were together. The career Matthew sacrificed was just a job. His real calling was using his experience to protect others. Their current apartment is smaller than their former house, but it's filled with the laughter of a healthy child, the satisfaction of meaningful work, and the peace that comes from living according to your deepest values. They've learned that security doesn't come from bank account balances or prestigious addresses. It comes from knowing you're making a positive difference in the world. The restaurant where Matthew now works as culinary director has become a model for the industry. Other establishments send their management teams for training. Culinary schools bring students for field trips. Food safety regulators point to it as an example of what's possible when restaurants commit to doing things right. But the real measure of success isn't the awards or recognition the restaurant has received. It's the fact that no worker there has ever suffered a preventable occupational illness. The comprehensive safety protocols, the thorough training programs, and the culture of transparency have created an environment where excellence and safety support each other rather than compete. The menu at Matthew's new restaurant doesn't feature the exotic preparations that made his reputation at the previous establishment. Instead, it showcases the incredible flavors that emerge when traditional techniques are executed perfectly with the finest safely sourced ingredients. Diners often comment that the food tastes different, better somehow, because they can taste the care and integrity that goes into every dish. The Williams Foundation continues to grow, now helping food service workers across the country and expanding into other industries with similar occupational hazards. The foundation's success has inspired similar organizations focused on different types of workplace safety, creating a network of advocacy groups that share resources and strategies. Richard Williams, who lost his son Jason to the same type of parasitic infection that nearly killed Matthew, has found new purpose in his grief. His tireless advocacy has led to policy changes that will protect thousands of workers from similar fates. Jason's death, while tragic and preventable, has become the catalyst for reforms that make the food service industry safer for everyone. The legal precedents established during the restaurant group investigation have made it easier for other workers to seek justice when they're harmed by employer negligence. Insurance companies can no longer easily deny coverage for occupational illnesses, and employers face serious consequences for retaliating against workers who report safety violations. Medical professionals are now better trained to recognize and treat parasitic infections thanks to research funded by the Foundation and awareness campaigns led by doctors like Dr. Myers. Emergency rooms have updated their protocols to ensure that patients with unusual symptom combinations receive appropriate testing rather than being dismissed with generic diagnoses. The changes extend beyond the immediate food service industry. Matthew's story has been studied in business schools as an example of how corporate cultures can become toxic and how individual courage can catalyze systematic reform. It's been featured in medical schools as a case study in patient advocacy and the importance of listening to patients' concerns. Most importantly, Matthew's experience has given hope to countless individuals facing their own battles with occupational illness, corporate negligence, or personal health crises. His story proves that even the most devastating circumstances can be transformed into opportunities for positive change if we're willing to speak truth and take action. The parasite that invaded Matthew's body was microscopic, invisible to the naked eye, but its effects were enormous. Similarly, the individual actions taken by Matthew, Emma, Tyler, Dr. Myers, and countless others seem small in isolation, but together they've created waves of change that continue to ripple through the industry and beyond. Today, when Matthew looks in the mirror, he sees more than just scars. He sees evidence of a journey that transformed him from someone who consumed opportunities into someone who creates them for others. He sees proof that survival isn't just about enduring trauma, it's about using that experience to build something better for those who come after. The anniversary dinner that started this entire ordeal was supposed to be perfect. In retrospect, it was, just not in the way Matthew originally planned. It was perfect because it led to the most important work of his life. It was perfect because it revealed the strength of his marriage and the depth of his character. It was perfect because it gave him the opportunity to save others from similar suffering. That's the ultimate lesson of Matthew Sinclair's story. Perfection isn't about avoiding problems, it's about transforming problems into purpose. It's not about preventing all suffering, it's about ensuring that suffering serves a greater good. It's not about protecting ourselves from all risks, it's about taking the right risks for the right reasons. Matthew's new life is far different from the one he'd planned, but it's also far more meaningful. Instead of creating memorable meals for wealthy diners, he's creating safer workplaces for vulnerable workers. Instead of pursuing individual fame, he's building systematic change that will outlast any personal achievement. The young chef who once believed that expertise could protect him from harm has become a man who understands that true expertise means recognizing and preparing for potential dangers. The ambitious professional who once put career advancement above all else has become an advocate who puts human welfare first. The husband who nearly lost his family due to occupational illness has become a father who's ensuring his daughter will enter a safer working world. The patient who was initially dismissed by medical professionals has become an advocate who ensures other patients receive proper care. Matthew Sinclair's story isn't finished. Every day brings new opportunities to advocate for safer workplaces, support struggling workers, and push for continued reforms. Every young chef he teaches, every policy he helps change, every family he assists adds new chapters to a story that began with personal tragedy but continues with collective hope. The parasites are gone from his body, but their legacy lives on in the positive changes they inadvertently catalyzed. Sometimes the most devastating experiences in our lives become the foundation for our most important contributions to the world. Sometimes what nearly destroys us becomes exactly what the world needs us to survive. That's the power of resilience, advocacy, and hope. That's the lesson of Matthew Sinclair's incredible journey from the heights of culinary success, through the depths of near-death experience, to a new pinnacle of meaningful service to others. His story reminds us that no matter how dark our current circumstances might seem, we always have the power to transform our pain into purpose and our suffering into service. In the end, the chef who nearly died from his own cooking didn't just survive, he thrived. He didn't just heal, he helped heal an entire industry's relationship with risk and responsibility. He didn't just tell his story, he changed the stories that will be written by countless others who follow in his footsteps. And that, perhaps, is the most perfect meal of all. A life transformed from personal triumph to collective service, seasoned with hard-won wisdom and served with a generous helping of hope for the future. Matthew Sinclair's story proves that even in our darkest moments, we're capable of creating something beautiful, meaningful, and lasting. The next time you sit down to enjoy a meal at a fine restaurant, remember Matthew's story. Remember that behind every dish is a human being whose safety and dignity matter as much as your dining experience. Remember that true excellence in any field requires not just skill and passion, but also integrity and responsibility. And if you ever find yourself in a position where you can speak up for someone who can't speak for themselves, remember Matthew's courage and Emma's advocacy. Remember that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit in its continuation, but that one voice raised in truth can eventually become a chorus of change. That's how we honor the Matthew Sinclairs of the world, not just by remembering their stories, but by continuing their work. Not just by admiring their courage, but by finding our own. Not just by learning from their experiences, but by using those lessons to make the world a little safer, a little kinder, and a little more just for everyone who comes after us. The story of the chef who nearly died from his own cooking is ultimately a story about all of us, about the risks we take, the systems we trust, and the courage we must find when those systems fail. It's about the power of love to sustain us through the darkest times, the strength of community to support us when we fall, and the responsibility we all share to protect each other from preventable harm. Matthew Sinclair's journey from pride to parasite to purpose reminds us that our greatest failures can become our most important successes, our deepest wounds can become our strongest calling cards, and our most personal struggles can become our most powerful tools for changing the world. That's a meal worth sharing, a story worth telling, and a life worth celebrating. It's proof that even when everything seems lost, hope remains. Even when systems fail, individuals can still make a difference. Even when the parasites of the world, both biological and institutional, seem overwhelming, they can still be defeated by the power of truth, courage, and unwavering commitment to justice. So here's to Matthew Sinclair, to Emma's strength, to Clara's future, and to all the workers who continue fighting for safer, more just workplaces everywhere. Here's to the doctors who listen, the advocates who persist, and the families who refuse to give up hope. Here's to the transformation of tragedy into triumph, of suffering into service, and of individual courage into collective change. And here's to you, for listening to this story and carrying its lessons forward into your own life and work. Because that's how real change happens. One person, one story, one act of courage at a time. The parasites may have nearly won the battle, but they definitely lost the war. Truth, justice, and human dignity have prevailed, and they always will, as long as there are people willing to fight for them. That's the real recipe for success in any field. Combine skill with integrity, season with compassion, serve with courage, and never, ever forget that the most important ingredient in any endeavor is the welfare of the human beings involved. Matthew Sinclair learned that lesson the hard way, but he made sure the rest of us could learn it more easily. And for that, we should all be grateful.